to video number 2. I am still here with Coleen from Raspberry Training and Maree from Compliance Assist, and we are talking everything standard 1.1. If you haven't watched our first video, highly recommend you can do that. That will be linked here, 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 or here. Been on YouTube this long and I still don't know, but that's okay. Otherwise, guys, we are getting right back into it, and we are in the weeds of standard 1.1. And one of the areas, as Maree was saying before, there was a lot of like these kind of keywords that came out. And following on from what you were saying, Coleen, standard C to me is probably the one of the most interesting standards here. And especially when we come to TASs, I think this is going to have an impact on our TASs. So standard C is training is structured and paced to support learners to progress, providing sufficient time for instruction, practice, feedback, and assessment. So I looked at this and I was like, there's like 8 words in there that are going to go audit. That's going to change my TAS design. So there was and I actually really love this. Like, I'm very happy with the way that has been, it's put a focus back on actual training and design of our training programs, which I think is wonderful. But I was very interested to hear from both of you, like Coleen, as you said, you love your TASs, how you think this is going to change that. And then Maree, from that kind of auditing perspective, what you think we're going to see come some of these audits or performance assessments, what we're going to see, what are some of the questions that we're potentially going to be answered, and how TASs may need to change in order to really, and more importantly, how training program designs will need to change in order to more clearly adapt for this, particularly in environments like CRICOS was one of the first ones that came to mind, and job seekers, as Coleen, you mentioned in the last video. So yeah, Coleen, what are your thoughts on this particular standard?
Well, I'm like you. 1.1C is where I went, whoa, straight away. And that's probably the one that I've sort of focused a lot of attention on myself. And I'm imagining, well, I love the idea of course design. It's just something I really enjoy doing. It's not something, it's difficult to do as a consultant because it requires budgets and commitments and vision and all of those things. But I look at this and I'm like, wow, okay, we're going to have to really, how the TAS is going to be written is one thing, but you know what, the TAS is just the documentation of the design. So it's more like, now we've got to design it the way we should have always designed it, instead of just counting numbers. And I just want to point out, so instruction is, when we're teaching, giving people readings, the stuff they're doing online, anything that they're doing. I mean, we've counted all those up in our amount of trainings in our TASs in the past, and that's great. We're used to instruction. I love that practice is in there. It should have been in there always. It's common sense but now it has to show in the TAS. The TAS is going to go, this is when we tell, it's like the coaching model, isn't it? We show them, we give them time to practice, we give them feedback, and we do that until they're ready for assessment. And for me, that feedback here is not well, this is my interpretation, you might disagree. I don't think that feedback is talking about feedback after summative assessment. That is talking about feedback on the practice. Maybe that practice is a role play. Maybe it's something they're doing on the job. Maybe it's a formative task you've set them, not for not some formative thing that we're counting towards assessment, for the real purpose of formative assessment, to give a person opportunity to practice, for the assessor to be able to gauge how the student is going, give them feedback, and when we can see the student's ready for assessment, that's when we assess. But it's not how it works. Assessment's on the 7th and, next Thursday. And so, we need to actually just fit it all in on.
Well, would that be the same day as the training, Coleen?
Probably. And, I was talking to a client yesterday, just in a conversation about a new client they picked up. The previous RTO was doing 3 units in 3 days, learning and assessment. Now, as long as that stuff is in our industry, and I don't care what unit it is, I'm I don't care what unit it is. I just think that it's ridiculous that we would be doing units in a day where we are doing all the training, instruction, where we're giving opportunities for practice and feedback, and we're making sure that the person actually is competent in the job before we assess them. And the way that assessment requirements are now it's pretty hard to, we could go down to the rules of evidence and all of that sort of stuff. People are supposed to actually have opportunities as, principles of assessment to do things in different environments and contexts and that sort of, how do you do all of that in a day?
Mm.
So I look, maybe there's a couple of units out there that are very theoretical and maybe very small, but this is not, we're not talking about those, rare units we're talking about. So I love that this is going to prevent this from happening, because how we are now going to have to prove how much time, was it enough to instruct them on all of the components of the training product, every part of that, and was there sufficient time, and to be able to say I trained them all in that before 11 a.m. is just not going to be possible, and then we're going to have to say, well, how did you get them to practice? Oh, well, we did that in a 5-minute spot, when we're done by 11:30, and then we started the assessment that took us all afternoon. There's no way that's going to add up. So this is probably one of the reasons I like it so much. But I think it's going to make TAS writing, I hate that whole TAS writing. I hate it when people contact me and say, can you write a TAS
course design? It's going to make course design very different.
Yeah, it's course designed, designing that course. To me, I've been in situations where I have actually not got round to the final TAS, but I can tell you this is all scheduled out and thought out, and how we got to this and what we did and why we did it and what all the, I've been too busy designing the course, and something's come up and I haven't put it all into one piece of paper. It's in notes and all of that sort of, but I still had a TAS there because it was all designed. People focus too much on the piece of paper, and I'm not saying it's good practice to not have the piece of paper, okay? It's not just a piece of paper, it's about how we design it, and this is going to make us design it well. So that's my little passionate speech about this. That's why I like it.
All right, Maree, what are your thoughts on this? Because I know that you're seeing it very similar to how I am, and there are just words blaring out. So what are your thoughts on this standard?
Yeah, I guess rather like designing training from a unit of competency, I probably see this whole of 1.1, A, B, C, D, E is really, as Coleen is saying, it's about course design, and it's holistic, so how you're going to structure and pace the training, the instruction, and we have to remember as well that training packages are knowledge and skills. So, it's about training skills as well as, the theoretical, training that we can, is probably perhaps in some cases more easily imparted, but how do we make sure we train the skills? But I think, that's going to depend on the mode of delivery that you're, so we go back, and I think, putting the whole thing together, looking at what are the requirements of that particular unit of competency. So therefore, what is the best way or ways to train that based on, who our cohort of learners are and, all the rest of it. And then we need to set up, well, how can I structure it, pace it? Are they existing learners who may have some background, and so therefore, that will change the pace perhaps of the training, or perhaps change the structure of it, because that you may do this part before that part because of the situation of the learners. And then, of course, when you've decided on a structure and pace, then you're going to go, right, well, how do I make sure that, if depending on the strategies that are chosen for the, the mode of delivery and the structure and the pace, are they actually interesting, engaging, participatory, whatever, you know, and are they cohort appropriate, age appropriate, you know, contextualized, meaningful, real, all those other things, you know, or are they just, you know, boring and, you know, here it is. And so, you know, I support what Coleen is saying. The TAS as a document is really just documenting this whole process of, you know, this whole process of 1.1 as a whole, rather than it being, you know, different. You might say, well, look, there's no way in the world, and we haven't touched on E yet, which is a whole, you know, different world again. Because E talks about, you know, where that training product requires work integrated learning or work placements or community-based, you know, learning. But that comes into your design, you know, that comes into the, well, you know, if I'm going to use a, you know, a flexible resource, you know, a self-paced learning type of guide of some sort, you know, that's not PC by PC, but anyway, so I'm going to use this. But where am I going to get the practice? Where are these students going to get opportunities to, you know, or how are they going to get opportunities for practice, you know? And what does practice look like? You know, how are they going to actually have an opportunity to, you know, to actually, you know, put these things into practice? And I think that's where our E is going to come in, because I see E very much at the moment in terms of it's used for assessment, you know, that workplace, you know, that work, that, you know, so yep, you're on the job, we'll do your assessment on the job. And I think this is going to bring in, I would actually hope, and I think it's a you know, a positive that perhaps we start looking at work integrated learning as much more about, you know, the training itself, you know, and look, that doesn't even mean, it doesn't necessarily for me have to be, you know, work placements, you know, send the student out to do such and such. It could be field trips. It could be, you know, industry coming into the training in some way. It could, and that could even be online, you know, for our flexible learners. But it's about bringing in that realism of the workplace, and giving those students, you know, and it might be just setting activities where the student, you know, is, you know, pop out into the workplace and do a field trip on your own, you know. Here's what I'd like you to do: go and interview 3 people that, you know something about this, and, you know, come back with your thoughts, you know. So I think the E component of 1.1, I hope, is going to become much more a focus for training as it currently is for assessment. But all of 1.1 I see as design 101, which is something we haven't done very well as a...
No, and I definitely think like the CRICOS environment is one that probably sat at a lot of the thought process behind this. You know, everyone kind of goes, oh, you know, if we look at like your standard Cert 3, 25 units, in what is effectively 40 days. For many RTOs, that's 30 days in an actual classroom training kitchen. 60 days in a classroom training kitchen, and then 20 days out in a workplace, which has a whole range of, you know, issues. There is not enough time in that qualification to actually deliver practice, to deliver a lot of practice time. You know, most RTOs do between 10, they do around about 8 to 10 of those units in term 1. Unless you have really well-designed training materials and assessments, and you are clustering a little bit in relationship to how you roll it all out, it's incredibly difficult, you know. Most trainees and apprenticeships, I would argue there's maybe 20% training done in the actual time delivered by the RTO, and I would argue probably 80% of it is assessment. And we can, that could be because we're making an argument that, the training is occurring in the workplace, but then how are we ensuring that the workplace is actually training? How are we ensuring that the workplace is even suitable for training? I was doing a couple of audits last year and, I was looking at the workplaces and I'm kind of going, okay, so hospitality workplace, you've got to deliver breakfast, lunch and dinners. You've got to, you've got to do desserts. You've got to do hot and cold. You've got to do a range of different, you've got to do a la carte. You've got to do buffet. And, I pull up the student's file and I'm like, okay, pull up the restaurant. And I'm like, I'm only open for dinners and lunches. They're a vegan restaurant. So I'm pretty sure they don't offer meats or a fish or like I sat with the ocean. I'm like, so how are they signing off this unit? And they're like, oh, but they do that in class. I'm like, yes, but the unit says
Yeah.
that they have to do all of those things in the workplace. I'm like, so when you went out to the workplace, you could clearly see that none of this was happening. The students never done a breakfast shift. They've never worked a buffet. They've never cooked actual meat in a restaurant. And they're like, yeah, how are we going to manage that? I'm like, well, you're going to pull them back in and we're going to have to send them somewhere that actually does that stuff. And you guys are going to have to start checking that that's actually done before you send them out somewhere. So, I think that to me, I look at a lot of this and kind of go, we aren't registered assessment organizations. We are registered training organizations. And I do love the fact that we're actually now looking at having, and I think that asking RTOs to create everything engaging and motivating, I think there's RTOs that are good at that, but I think that's further down the track for me. I think the first stage is actually going to be RTOs just looking at it and going, are we actually giving job seekers, young apprentices, CRICOS students any opportunity to practice before we actually take them straight into assessment? Or is the assessment the first time that we're actually even, putting them at a pot, chucking them up at heights and things like that? And that to me is going to be like from the financial perspective of RTOs, like when this actually does come into effect, I think that's where we're going to see operations managers, training managers, training coordinators, managers, CEOs turning around and going, what do you mean? What do you mean we've actually got to train them before we assess them? That's going to cost a lot of money. And I'm like, nah, like this is where, guys, you need to be using 2024 to actually really genuinely look at how you've designed your training and assessment and make sure that you have very clearly thought about your cohort and thought about where that training is going to occur. And there are instances where, for example, people are coming back for a first aid, but it's a first aid refresher. They literally did first aid 3 years ago. They've been a first aider. They're doing a refresh. Yes, they don't need a lot of training. They really are going into an assessment only circumstance, but you're going to have to separate those people from, Peter Piper who walked in, who's never done first aid before and is actually going to require some training before he goes into his assessment. So I think some of the public courses are going to need to do a bit of a rejig on this is who is suitable for our assessment only pathways, and this is who we have to provide training for. I think there's going to be a lot of logistical issues in and around those sorts of operational matters. And this is where a lot of the discussions are going to happen between compliance, quality, operations, finance. When I read this, I was like, it's going to be a lot of finance. There's going to be a lot of finance managers, operations, compliance discussions that are going to happen, that are going to be,
And you're going to have to invest in the design. So you can't just buy off the shelf products and do some standardized TAS that, the admin assistant put together on a template. and expect that this is going to work. The only way to make this work is through clever design. Because if you're going to buy a whole bunch of individual units with, these books from, a publisher somewhere and just deliver it like that, besides the fact there's repetitive stuff and all of those things that are going to slow you down, it's not engaging. It's, there's lots of issues with that. Whereas if you invest up front in a product that is, one, it probably can be delivered faster because you're using clustering, because you're doing those things to bring it all together. Like, remember that a qualification is a job role and a unit of competency is a job task. So we should be looking at designing our programs, in a way that are going to result in people being able to do the job. Anyway, I do think that people are going to have RTOs to survive this, because if ASQA now are going to come and audit this, and I do think that I think we're going to see a pendulum, the pendulum with ASQA now, and ASQA is going to have a little bit more teeth in the future, and I think they're going to go after this. It won't be just a matter of getting away with it. If you're not delivering quality.
And I'd like to see it more. I understand all of those. I think for me, nothing much has really changed from the previous standard. As I said, the devil is in the detail, because this is one that has become, the previous standard was, a sufficient amount of training that is sufficient to, whatever. And then we had, this volume of learning. Well, that was the allocation that was supposed to be the practice, the learning, the absorption of the training. But that was the part that tended to just be lost in terms of, if there were no strategies in a lot of cases developed for what does the volume of learning itself look like. It was always, here's the training, and then you have 3 months in order to complete this sort of thing, but there was no so it's really putting some of that sort of detail into what I think the previous standards implied, suggested. I would like to see, and again, with anything, not doing it because we're going to get audited. I think, my God, think of the change that this could make to learner satisfaction. Wow, motivating, engaging, structured, paced. I get some opportunity to practice. I think, if we take the whole, I'm doing it for compliance, of course, but I keep going back to Coleen about course design. Let's design for our student. Let's design so that, it is motivating, engaging. It is structured and paced. It is all of the, there's opportunities for them to apply, to practice, to do whatever. And hey, guess what? When it comes time for audit, you're going to breeze through, because you've done, you've ticked all those. Well, yeah, sure, there might be one or two little things that, someone interprets a bit differently. But instead of seeing this standard, for me, instead of seeing this standard as auditable, this whole focus on ASQA's actions, wow, what a difference this could make for engaging learners into the training itself. And that's what good design of training is really able to do.
But I do definitely want to be in the room when the CEO has the argument as to why, with ASQA, as to why the resources should not be engaging and motivating, because we know it's going to happen.
Absolutely, I do. We have enough trouble as to why the resources should be compliant, much less, meet number A, that they're consistent with the requirements of the training package. I mean, and it was an argument I had very recently. So, when we start to say, well, not just are they, do they meet all of these requirements, but, all the other things, I agree with you. I think there's going to be some, some interesting, for those RTOs that are really, see the value in it, and the value of more than just for compliance, or
for the bottom line. It is it's hard for RTOs to do all of this
Of course.
and be competitive. And, funding, some states seriously don't provide any
It doesn't
funding
support
that's
that.
going to
No.
get close to that. So there are financial issues there, and I get it from a CEO's point of view. But in reality, you just got to invest and do it right at the beginning. Invest and do it right and have something quality. And you're not spending all of your time then chasing your tail trying to fix all the issues. Do it right at the beginning. And I think course design. I wanted to just add, and I know it's a little bit off track, about the item E. And
I'm going to pause you on that one because I definitely want us to go into that very, very quickly. But we're going to do that in the next video if that's okay.
Video. Good.
Guys, this has been video number 2. Please do follow our series. We're going to be putting all of this into a playlist. You can also go and check out the links below for both Coleen and Maree's websites. You can follow them on all of their socials as well. We are going to be back for video number 3 where we're going to be talking about work-based training because I can see with these 2 ladies that they do have some very keen thoughts they want to share. So thank you very much, Coleen and Maree. We will be back very shortly, guys. Thank you very much. We hope you are enjoying the series. My name is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services.